I have to look at my ugly mug every time I start one of these videos, and I'm realizing that I'm getting very red in the face, especially at the end of a video. It's getting a little bit better as I'm talking now, but I feel horrible for you individuals who have to deal with looking at my ugly mug all this time. So thank you for hanging in there. And I should have mentioned this very early on in the introduction or in Chapter 1. I highly encourage you to follow the link in the description, and instead of watching me talk, perhaps instead reading along and listening to what I'm saying, because then you wouldn't have to look at this ugly thing. I tried to record the screen itself and highlight lines. I was going through them. I couldn't get the recording program to work and record the audio properly, so I ultimately resorted to this fucking face. So, Chapter 8, Atheism and Science. And let me just say, this kind of a paragraph, or chapter I should say, in an article has so much potential. There is a very strong relation between atheism and science. One does not necessarily lead to the other. For instance, again, Dr. Francis Collins, former head of the Human Genome Project, brilliant man of science, not an atheist. Kenneth Miller, I think he's a doctor, I'm not entirely sure of his credentials. He was one of the Christians who spoke against intelligent design in the Kitzmiller v. Dover trial. Man of science, not an atheist. There is, however, a strong correlation with being highly intelligent, highly educated, and a lack of religiosity. Inversely, a high level of ignorance leads and correlates to a very high level of religiosity. So the more you know, the less religious you are. The less you know, the more likely you are to believe in fairies. So this kind of a chapter has a lot of potential, but let's see how Mariano, author of this article, squanders that potential. Although the scientific endeavor has nothing to offer atheism, except everything, because science kind of demonstrate that the God claims of all the world's religions are full of shit, atheists have co-opted it, oh those evil atheists, and employed it as a facade which they wrap around atheism in order to make it appear as if it is deserving of the merits of scientific respectability. Cue intelligent design theory. Projecting hypocrite. The contradiction in the atheist's attempt to employ science toward their end is: 1. They claim that science only deals with the material and therefore has nothing to say about the immaterial or supernatural. How is that a contradiction towards the end of atheism, the end goal, in favor of the atheist agenda? How is that a contradiction? Science does only deal with things that exist. It cannot and does not have anything to say on a magic man who hides behind clouds, except insofar as we've looked behind clouds and there wasn't any fucking man there. 2, they claim that science has disproved the immaterial or supernatural. Not entirely, but every time someone makes a claim that there's something immaterial, such as the soul, or supernatural, such as ghosts, telekinesis, divining rods being a thing that work, homeopathy, water memory, which is a part of homeopathy, things like that. Every time someone has made a claim like that, science has determined that the claim is full of shit. So not only do atheists claim that science has disproved claims of the immaterial, we are correct in saying so because it is the truth. Sidebar here underneath this, next to the next paragraph: evolution is the atheist's origins myth. Except it's not a myth, and it's nothing to do with atheists. Kenneth Miller, as stated, is a Christian who accepts evolution as the origin of life, or at least the origin of the diversity of life on the planet. He may believe that God created evolution, the mechanism of evolution, but he still believes it's a real thing. and that's how life appeared and got here. And I say appeared, I want to specify. There's the related field to biology, which would be abiogenesis, which is to say that from naturally occurring, self-replicating molecules, we eventually got what we would today call life. And this is distinct from spontaneous generation, which is not only what Christians believe, you know, God, people, and it's also a view that existed some centuries ago where people didn't explain or understand how if you leave meat lying around, then the next day you'll have little larvae on it, and eventually you'll have flies. Oh, the meat is turning into flies, was the thought. It took someone who had enough sense to, say, take a piece of that meat, put it in a sealed jar, and after the period of time where you would normally get flies, hey, this sealed jar contains rotten meat, but there's no flies in it. So the origins myth here is just bullshit. Despite this, some atheists claim that the way that science disproves the immaterial or supernatural is by increasingly finding material causes for material effects. It's also by finding out that there are no immaterial effects, or the effects that are observed are actually material, as it turns out. However, this does not trouble the Christian because God created the material realm, and it follows logically that material effects will have material causes, and such causes and effects do not exclude the material or supernatural, such as God or miracles. This does not trouble Christians because reasons, and therefore God. Such atheists have restricted their thought processes. Yes, they have restricted their thought processes to things that are real and make sense, not to things that are bullshit and make no coherent sense at all, such as Christianity. We have restricted our thought processes to things that exist, not to bullshit. We would have, and thus would have to deny a miracle or appearance of God, even if it took place before their very eyes. Actually, there's a Star Trek The Next Generation episode that covers this, and it's just so great. There's this planet that made a deal in their mythology with an evildoer, a villain, a Satan figure, 1,000 years ago. And they were promised 1,000 years of a golden age, at which point the devil in the story would reappear and demand tribute and demand to rule for a period of time and want jewels and stuff. And this planet is being bothered by earthquakes and appearances of this devil and people dying and disappearing or whatever. And the Enterprise is sent to investigate. And it turns out that this evildoer, who can change appearance at will and disappear and reappear wherever they wish, and can cause earthquakes with the snap of a finger and stop the earthquakes with the snap of a finger, it turns out that this is an alien with a spaceship that is cloaked, that is using a modified transporter beam to appear and disappear in a puff of brimstone, a kind of holodeck to change its appearance for everyone to see, according to preset standards, and is using tractor beams to pull on the tectonic plates to cause earthquakes. So I would not, as an atheist, deny that there is a miracle or an appearance of God if it took place before my very eyes. The first thing I would ask is, what the fuck is going on? And I would then attempt to find out what's going on. And if I were to find out that it was in fact God, I would have no choice but to accept this fact and move on with my fucking life. As a Christian now, apparently. Or less specifically, as a theist of some variety. Whatever the God is, I would have to believe in it because there it is. If I can't explain it any other way, then either I don't have an explanation and therefore cannot formulate a conclusion, or the conclusion is that it is a sort of God and I would have no choice at that point. I would never, and most atheists would not, deny the existence of God if God were to reveal himself in such a way that answered all those objections that are best identified by that Star Trek episode. And yes, I realize I'm using Star Trek in an argument against this bullshit, but it just fits so well. I think it must have been intentional. These atheists would opt for a faith-based belief that someday someone will find a materialistic explanation. I may not necessarily opt for that, but it is possible that someone might. As in, it must have been an alien with a cloaked spaceship, or the Vogons in Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxies. The Vogons showed up, and they spoke through every metallic object that resonated. Even just your toaster is speaking to you because they're using radio waves that make metallic objects resonate at frequencies and cause a voice, and the voice is in the language that you understand no matter where you are in the world. That would be a materialistic explanation for something that certainly seems to be a miracle. So you can't just do what Christians do and I saw something I can't explain, therefore I must fall to my knees and open my mouth and wait for God's dick. I wouldn't opt for a faith-based belief that is wrong, but I certainly wouldn't automatically believe that is correct because my limited knowledge of what is actually going on counts as proof of the specific God that some specific group claims is theirs. Another problem with this is these kinds of miracles that they claim happen in many places around the world. They're not miracles. They are bullshit stories that, are best explained by things like it didn't actually happen or mass hysteria. But these things happen all over the world. People find the word God written on their fucking toast. And they also find the word Allah. Does that mean that both God, the God of Christianity, in which Jesus is the Messiah, and the God of Islam, in which Jesus is a mere prophet who did not die on the cross and become resurrected, but instead found a crony of his to take his place and then disappeared with the fucking bag? Are those both true at the same time because these miracles apparently happen to everyone? What about the Hindu ones? What about the Viking ones? What about, all of the miracles that are claimed to have happened? Or do they stand as 100% irrefutable, absolute proof of every single religion being true no matter how contradictory they are with each other? Of course not. Atheists don't automatically reject these things. We just reject them generally because they're such fucking terrible piles of crap as proof that proves nothing. Or the fallacy of expected future human omniscience. Right, because knowing that sometimes people thought things and were proven wrong in the future means that there will always be such an event happening. This is actually an appeal to future consequences that is most often made by religious people. Oh, you think there's no proof for God now, but you'll see someday. The same thing for spirit science. The Mortimer videos actually refer to this several times, and the responses from the dumbass in those plagiarized piles of crap, he does say things like, you may think we don't have the proof now, but there might be someday, and so we are right. No, that's not the fucking thing that's going on. Or they may, also without evidence, appeal to hallucination even if numerous people witness the same event, such as the resurrection of Jesus. Right, name 4 who saw the resurrection of Jesus. Can you? Can you name 4 people who were there? And I'm going to stop you if you're a Christian and about to write, the name of the women who showed up. They didn't see the resurrection of Jesus, did they? They saw an empty tomb. In the story book that you are quoting from right now. The storybook in which your fictional Jew, who was an Arab, who walked on water, apparently died while saying 4 contradictory things depending on which gospel you're reading, as his last words. because they're not all the same thing, you know, therefore they're contradictory last words. In this storybook written by cultists who believe that this magic man was actually magic and not a charlatan, this book that assumes and asserts the existence of this fictional character that is attested nowhere else in any fucking history of the world, you are asserting that this was not a hallucination, but it was an actual event that was witnessed by people, even though even in your bullshit story, it's not witnessed by people, and I don't have to appeal to it being a hallucination, because I can just as easily say it never fucking happened and people said it did. Resurrection of Jesus, comma, reference, hallucinations occur within the brain and thus are not shared, except in the cases of mass hysteria which have been seen to occur. I don't know how well explained those are, but there's also this, I think he was a Canadian who went around and he wanted to document cases of exorcism. And he did not believe in exorcism, but he didn't outright reject them. He was literally just going around and joining in on exorcisms, watching to see what was going on, and to report his findings. And after seeing an exorcism where nothing happened, everybody turned to him and said, "Did you see that? They rose up like 2 feet in the air." And he was standing right there, and the person was lying on the fucking bed, unmoving, and all of them saw the person rise up 2 feet in the air, and he was staring, and he didn't. And he said, "I didn't see them rising. They didn't fucking move. It's not that I want to prove you're wrong or anything. It's just, it didn't happen." People can convince themselves that they've seen things that did not actually happen. And this can happen moments after the events. It's one of the reasons why eyewitness accounts are so fucking unreliable. The longer it takes in order to get to someone that has an eyewitness account, the less reliable it is. There's plenty of tests that have done this. I remember seeing on the show QI, in one of the shows, a guy wearing a red jacket and some jeans shows up and grabs money out of people's hands around the table. They're about to bet on something, and this guy just runs across and yanks all the money out of their hands, and at the end of the show, him and 3 other guys dressed in a similar fashion, although one of them has different colored jeans, are standing up, and all the people who were just sitting there and saw the guy up close because he ran by them and they followed him and they were staring at him, very few of them actually got who he was correctly. They had a 1 in 4 chance of guessing, and they guessed at less than a 1 in 4 chance. I think no one actually got it right. Another example is a professor at some college or university. He's at the front of his class, and it's one of those classes that has the sloping floor so that each level is staring down at the stage where the teacher is. And some student runs in wearing a wig, a blonde wig, I think, and he just runs through the class, and there's a door at the back wall at the far end. He just runs through the room, exits the hall, and the teacher says, "Did anyone see that brown-haired guy run by?" And when he asked the class later what hair color the guy had, they all said brown, even though every single one of them was literally staring at a blonde wig. And therefore the guy had blonde hair. Or it wasn't a wig, it was actually blonde hair, and the teacher just said brown, and everyone said brown. Eyewitness accounts are the most useless forms of evidence, and yet this is what we are expected to believe is not only the highest form of evidence, but the one that should convince us to completely accept every other claim that is ever made. Yes, hallucinations can be shared. And not only hallucinations, but ideas like, "Did you see that brown-haired guy go by?" can be shared like a virus. It can spread just because one guy says so. It infects all the other people's perceptions, and therefore they believe something happened that did not, or not the way that was described. So yeah, hallucinations occur within the brain. They can also be shared. And it's not necessarily a hallucination. It could simply be something that never fucking happened and people said it did, as I said. They might simply be satisfied with thinking that they will never know. And that's so terrible. We might never know if Jesus existed. This only matters to fucking Christians. In any event, for those atheists who have their minds made up as to God's non-existence, the ones who do have their minds made up are idiots. It's a tiny minority. It's a fractional number. Conversely, the number of theists who do not have their minds made up to God's existence are fractional. You have a tiny number of theists who would be so much as willing to admit that maybe they might possibly maybe be wrong, maybe. The claim here that is that we are closed-minded. Fuck you. We close our minds only to things that are patently wrong. It follows that there's no evidence for God's existence. Right. If you assume as a starting position that there is no God, that God does not exist, it follows that there's no evidence for God's existence. Wrong. You could start out assuming that there is no God and then be presented evidence of God's existence and change your mind. Because that's something intellectually honest people do. And it is something that Christians like this lying sack of shit do not do and are incapable of doing. They can never change their position based on evidence because their position is not based on evidence and they do not value evidence. They simply value bald-faced assertions as fact, period, and nothing will ever change that. This restricts their thinking, projection again, hypocrisy again, because their chosen worldview will not allow them to see reality for what it is, says the people who believe in a talking fucking plant that's on fire. Would not allow them to follow the evidence, but would numb their cognitive faculties. Oh, how ironic. Religion in a nutshell. The numbing of people's cognitive faculties. As they stare into the corner of absolute materialism. No atheist that I know of, that I have ever heard of, believes in absolute materialism. And even if you found someone who did, what is an idea? Is an idea absolutely made out of materials? Or is it a concept that is the product of minds at work? Oh, therefore absolute materialism is wrong. Simple as that. Materialism is the view that stuff exists. There is no supernatural anything, kind of. It's a vague way of putting it, but yeah, materialism has that the basis is stuff. Your personality is because your brain's functioning. The soul, if you want to call it that, who you are, is the brain. Phineas Gage again, the guy who had a spike through his head, he completely changed his entire personality after getting a spike through his fucking brain. If that doesn't tell you that your soul, if you want to call it that, is part of your brain, a product of your brain, then you're an idiot. Then you're an idiot. Period. And this ends with atheism is the Valium registered brand of the people. Right. It's not opium that is the, religion that is the opium of the masses. No, it's atheism is the Valium of the people. This really pisses me off. And I know I don't sound like I'm annoyed right now. I might look discouraged, and I am, but this kind of bullshit pisses me off. If you don't even bother to understand why people say things like religion is the opiate of the masses, and you just turn it around and use some other product and think you're clever, you should be ashamed of yourself. Someone who does something like this should be made to feel miserable about themselves, not by others. They shouldn't be made miserable by people like me ridiculing them, deservedly so, for being such shameless shitbags. They should be capable of rereading this and going like, fuck, did I actually write that down? Holy fuck. I never want anyone to see me. They should be forever ashamed of showing their face in public. They should go out with a brown paper bag over their head. They should change their name, move to a different country, and abandon all ties with this kind of bullshit. But this guy thinks he actually nailed those atheists. Oh, they're on Valium. Religion is the opiate of the masses precisely because it gets people to be fucking sheep who accept everything someone says, such as the Pope. Atheism is the conclusion derived on evidence, or on the lack of evidence, in favor of the opposite claim. How is that Valium? Encouraging people to actually learn and think about something is not the same thing as telling them something is true and no matter what you do, you can't change your mind. It is the opposite. Not more of this bullshit. It is a bit like the different approaches of two people to understanding a magician's trick. Okay. Yes, I agree. It is like that. Let's see how he fails to accurately describe it, or, even better, accurately describes it but assigns himself the wrong side. Both attempt to understand the manner in which the trick was performed. Well, okay, he just failed. Religious people are not trying to understand the manner in which the trick was performed. They assert that there was no trick and that it was done with magic. One will go beyond that and seek to ascertain the characteristics of the magician by considering the method of the trick. Okay, yeah, that's religious people. They take a very narrow set of facts and blow it up into God. If that's not clear enough to you, go back and view chapter 7, where that was the whole fucking point. Take a narrow thing and make a conclusion that does not follow. Over and over again, does not follow, does not follow. However, the other says, I now understand how the trick works, but there was no conceiver of the trick. The fuck? The trick was not designed. The trick is just there and that's all. No. I was really hoping he would make a valid comparison here, but of course that was too much to expect. Science gives satisfaction. I guess I will qualify that. The trick works. Therefore the trick doesn't exist, is what he's saying here. Contradicting yourself to make someone else look bad just means you're a douchebag. Science gives satisfaction to the curious because of its explanatory scope. If a Christian claims that God created life, the scientifically minded atheist would ask, how? Right. And no Christian has ever explained that, except magic. Certainly, the Christian is likewise curious. No. By definition, religious people are incurious of the world around them. They are only curious, to a very limited extent in the majority of cases, to what some stupid book says. Oh, there's all that science over there? What does the Bible say? Oh, it says there'll be people who disagree. Great, that science is false. Oh, we must be at the end times. What does the Bible say? There will be war and rumors of war. Hey, there's rumors of war right now. And there's wars going on. It must be the end times. What's that? There's always been war and rumors of war? That doesn't matter. Clearly it was wrong then, but it's correct now. I had another point. Kind of slipped my mind. But, thinking themselves wise. Did I say wives? Thinking themselves wise. The one thing the Bible gets right, and again, is misattributed to the wrong group. So yeah, certainly the Christian is likewise curious. No, they're not. But the Christian's inability to explain how God did it makes the atheist disinterested. What should matter is the Christian's inability to explain how God did it should stand as proof that you don't have a fucking point, and the fact that no Christian even ever bothers to find out how God did it makes them incurious. No? Yet it is important to note that this amounts to the atheist attempt, or pseudo-attempt, to place all things within the purview of science. It is an attempt. It's also good. It's also a fact that if something exists, you can explain it through science, because that's how science works. Science can only attest or fall under, the scope of things that exist is the only thing that can happen in science. If something exists, you can evaluate it with science. We may not have the scientific field yet to evaluate something, such as I don't know. Let's go with string theory. It's not accepted right now, but perhaps in the future we'll discover that string theory is correct, and therefore it will be a field of science. If God existed, it would fall under the purview of science to explain how God works. It may be that the science can only be explained by God, and we would have to form a field of science that uses magic as an argument. But that case has not been made, and we see now that anything that does exist can only be explained by science, and only things that exist can be explained by science, and science can explain anything that exists. So it's not a pseudo attempt, it is something that atheists not only attempt, but succeed in doing. And that's why religion fails. Which is an unscientific, yes, pointing out that things that exist can be attested to and explained by science is an unscientific position. Unscientific, philosophical/religious, which has nothing to do with science, position. Again, parenthesis, how can all that is knowable be known to be knowable through science? If in 50 billion years humanity still exists, and science has continued to advance, and humanity has spread to all of the world, and there are enough people to evaluate all of the facts and all the data in the universe, we may discover that we now know everything that there is to be known. That's how. I'm not saying that's going to happen, I'm not saying that's possible, but that would be how it would be knowable for science to know all that it knows is known, or whatever that sentence is. When it comes to atheism's co-option of science and their self-proclaimed reliance upon evolution, no atheist relies upon evolution, so I don't see how this is self-proclaimed any fucking thing. Greg Koukl has made a very telling and succinct statement. The point of evolution, Mother Nature without Father God. And again, this is a sentence fragment, so I don't know the fucking context, and of course they're not going to provide it. In other words, evolution is the atheist's origin myths. Claiming it twice doesn't make it true. Designed to do away with God the Creator, creation without a creator. No. Evolution is an attempt to explain the diversity of life. It is an attempt to explain it that is in fact successful and very highly evidenced by everything we found, and never even contradicted by a single point of fact discovered to this point since Darwin 150 years ago, I think it was. It is tested every single day. Every time an animal or a plant is born or reproduces, every time a paternity test is run, every time a DNA test is run, it's just every day there are an uncountable number of tests of evolution, and never do you see a crocoduck. So it is not only an attempt to do away with the Creator God, it is a successful explanation of reality. The Creator God just does not factor into evolution, because you don't need to have fucking fairies in your garden to explain how the plants fucking grow. Let us note the words of P.E. Hodgson. Who the fuck that is? They won't tell you. Although we seldom recognize it, scientific research requires certain basic beliefs about the order and rationality of matter, and its accessibility to the human mind. Scientific research requires certain basic beliefs about the order and rationality of matter. Okay, yes, we do assume in science that the universe exists and it makes sense, and we can understand it. Those are some of the basic assumptions of science. Stuff doesn't happen at random. This is one of the reasons why the God hypothesis is useless, because if you do have an all-powerful being who can just fuck up your lab results anytime he fucking wants, you cannot assume the rationality of matter. That you cannot assume that the universe makes sense, and therefore any attempt to understand the universe would then be worthless. If that were the case, we wouldn't be... Well, you wouldn't be watching me right now, and I would not be talking into a little plastic circle with a lens in the middle. if we did not assume that the universe made sense and that we can understand it, we would not have computers. Because to assume that reality, confronted with the fact that we understand how electronics work, how electricity, magnetism, and all these things work, how wires transmit information, all that stuff, the fact that we understand all that is pure accident in this God-based view of reality. God can make anything happen, and then he could fuck electronics tomorrow just by snapping his fucking fingers, and then computers don't work. Or, hey, you like your chair? It's a duck now. Explain how that makes sense. In that view of the world, all of the world's computers, all the world's cars, all the machinery in the world, everything we understand that makes sense in our understanding, that we can use that understanding to build things with, is understood by pure luck. Computers don't actually work because the printed circuits work. It's just God is wiggling the little electrons around and making it look like it all works just to fuck with us. And tomorrow he can just stop and then, hey, computers don't work anymore. The electrons aren't moving the way we thought. What's happening? So yes, we seldom recognize that scientific research requires certain assumptions. True. They came to us in their full force through the Judeo-Christian belief in an omnipotent God, creator and sustainer of all things. There's a long series of, there's an ellipsis here that cuts out a part. I don't know if it's in the original quote or not. You won't find it. There is a reference, so feel free to look through it yourself. But again, I'm using only what they give me. This pause makes me think that there's a bit of that sentence that's missing. Why am I looking over there? The camera's there. I'm sorry for that. There's a bit that's missing in this sentence, and so it kind of makes me think that this part of the quote is wrong. Maybe the certain basic beliefs about the universe did come through us through the Judeo-Christian belief. Maybe it came through us through the Judeo-Christian belief, which makes it impossible to assume that the universe makes sense if you just have a magic man who snaps his fingers and it fucks everything up. So maybe we realized that that was bad, and therefore we formulated these assumptions to create science. Creator and sustainer of all things. Right. Bullshit as quoted. Perhaps correct in the full context, but the context I explained, if that is a full context, but as pointed out here, completely wrong. Science does not make certain assumptions based on the existence of God. In such a worldview, it becomes sensible to try and understand the world, and this is the fundamental reason science developed as it did in the Middle Ages in Christian Europe, culminating in the brilliant achievements of the 17th century. Right. Dark Ages. Remember that one? Kind of argues against this point, although Dark Ages is before the 17th century, so I guess we survived the Judeo-Christian nightmare of the Dark Ages and decided it really sucked, so we created something that didn't suck so much. Peter Harrison, Andreas Idrios Professor of Science and Religion at the University of Oxford, pointed out, it is commonly supposed that when in the early modern period individuals began to look at the world in a different way, they could no longer believe what they read in the Bible. It is commonly supposed, because it is true. In this book I shall suggest that the reverse is the case, that when in the 16th century people began to read the Bible in a different way, they found themselves forced to jettison traditional conceptions of the world. Well, yeah, they were forced to jettison traditional conceptions of the world. The flat world, surrounded by a crystalline dome with little stars set inside them, was the traditional conception of the world, and therefore it had to be jettisoned. Had it not been for the rise of the literal interpretation of the Bible and the subsequent appropriation of biblical narratives by early modern scientists, modern science may not have arisen at all. In sum, the Bible and its literal interpretation have played a vital role in the development of Western science. That sounds like bullshit, but I agree with it. Because get this, people believe the Bible literally. They wanted to learn more about the world around them, so they went to the Bible and read it literally. Then they found out it didn't make any fucking sense, so science happened. So it is rather ironic today that many connect science with atheism. It is really a Christian enterprise. Yeah, like slavery was. Except slavery actually was a Christian enterprise, and it remains to this day a Christian enterprise, according to their holy book. Most Christians might disagree with it, but hey, the Bible hasn't changed. 8.1 Atheism and Miracles. Atheists often argue that miracles cannot occur because the laws of nature, or natural laws, are immutable. By a conveniently self-serving inference, they further argue that since miracles do not occur, the supernatural, God, must not exist. Really? You want to accuse other people of having a convenient self-serving inference? Douchebag. What are the laws of nature? Here, our interest is not necessarily to list and describe them, but to point out that what the term the laws of nature are our generalizations about how what we term the laws of nature are our generalizations about how the natural world normally works. Great. The laws of nature are not laws that were written down and can never be changed. They are how we notice the world works around us, and we codified it in a series of descriptions. It is not prescription, but description. That's what the laws of nature are, right? Okay, great. We understand that the laws of nature are descriptive. Let's see how long it takes him to fuck this one up. How the world normally works, which are inferred from our observations of the natural world. One question to keep in mind is whether we have discovered all the laws of nature. That is our knowledge complete? And no, it isn't, and every scientist will tell you the same, unless they're a fucking Christian who thinks all of the knowledge of the world is in the Bible. Christians, I said, but it also applies to Muslims who think that the Quran is the last book anyone needs. Are they immutable? In order to answer in the affirmative, I thought it was descriptive. Fuck, already? We must first presuppose that we know all of the laws. No. We don't. We don't need to know the full value of pi to be able to tell you it's not 5. Pi is 3.1415, etc., etc., etc. If someone comes up to me and says, if pi equals 5, I can tell them they're wrong. Aha! That person might answer. Do you know all of the value points of the decimals of pi? No? Then I assert that it's 5 and I am therefore correct. Assuming that we do, which we don't have any reason to, and in fact should not, we must further assume that we know of every possible action and interaction of these laws in every possible scenario and in every possible combination. No. Gravity may well be immutable. We don't really know yet how gravity works, although the Higgs field, the Higgs boson that they're looking for at CERN is kind of pointing in that direction. Gravity is finally having some sort of backing to it, which we did not have even though we used it. We don't need to know everything about gravity to observe that it works in every single case. We do not need to have full knowledge of all events, past, present, and future, to work with the assumption that gravity works consistently. See, I just dropped it a second ago. I'm going to drop it again, okay? Knowing what I do about gravity, although I don't know everything about gravity, I can infer, I can assume that it's going to fall and hit the desk and bounce a little bit and then stop. I really hope it doesn't just bounce off the desk. But here goes, okay? Here's the assumption. The test of gravity being consistent even though I don't know everything about it. Past performance is not necessarily indicative of future results. But if you make a test of something 1,000 times, it is fair to infer that the 1,000th and first time will have the same result. Same goes for evolution. We test evolution 1,000 times an hour all around the world. More than 1,000 times. That's just pennies. It's kids' play. We test it over and over every single second of every day, everywhere, and it always turns out that there's no crocoduck. What does that mean? Well, it means that we probably have a decent enough understanding to form predictive models of reality. Even though we don't have full knowledge, we can say that gravity works a certain way, that evolution works a certain way, that we know enough about these things to call them done. What if they are not immutable? What if green is red? What if 2 + 2 = dozen? Yes, dozen, not 5 or 12. Dozen. What if 2 + 2 = dozen? Asking a stupid fucking question does not give you a valid fucking point. In such a case, where they are not immutable, God, who not only invented them, but who lives outside of their influence, can manipulate them. Great. So your God is a lying dick. So we cannot assume that the universe works a certain way. We must realize, we must be confronted with this realization that all of our understanding of everything, from plumbing, from the most basic machinery of physics, to complex systems like computers and the internet, all these things work purely by luck. Thank you for granting my earlier point. What if they are immutable? In such a case, God can still break or bend them. There's a period missing in this article. According to such a scenario, God would have created what we understand to be immutable laws for the very purpose of displaying His ability to break or bend them, and thereby alert us to the miraculous. Right. God, keep this in the air when I drop it. Oh, fuck. Oh, but a Christian will interrupt here and say, well, God does not abide to be tested. How convenient. He will break the laws of physics when it suits his purpose, but he has never done it when someone was watching. Oh, sure, there's books saying he did, but there's also books saying that platform 9 3/4 can be obtained by walking through a fucking brick wall in King's Cross Station. Guess what? Fuck you. In fact, without such laws, we would be unable to detect miracles. Right, because stuff always happens the same way, stuff always falls down, and always the same way, on always the same speed, and always causing the same kind of event at the end. But God only made that so that miracles could be proven to exist. Name one. Show me one. Just go ahead. An even better understanding is that miracles are an addition to the laws. So breaking a law is merely an addition. I'll remember that next time someone tries to kill me and I'm forced to kill them. I say next time, not that this has ever happened. But, yeah, next time someone tries to kill me and I kill them, I'll simply say, sure, there's a law telling us that we shouldn't murder, but it's an addition to the law that I just made. It was a miracle, me killing that person. Cue the jokes about how I could kill anyone would take a miracle. A man sinks in the sea if his weight is greater than his buoyancy, Archimedes' principle. A rope and a helicopter do not violate this principle. They don't even come close to violating it because buoyancy. But add another force to the system. No, we're still covering buoyancy. I mean, you don't even understand the physics you're trying to mangle here. Similarly, the Son of God could likewise add another force to enable himself to walk on water without violating Archimedes' principle. Really, a man sinks in the sea if his weight is greater than his buoyancy. Ropes and helicopters do not violate that because their weight is not greater than their buoyancy. But the Son of God can, who has greater weight than buoyancy, become supernaturally buoyant in violation of the principle, thus violating the laws of physics. What the fuck? The materialist argument against miracle decrees that the universe is a closed system with no divine foot in the door. No, actually, the people who decree that there is no divine foot in the door is the Christians who have been forced to move their God outside of the universe because we looked at the top of the mountain and God wasn't there. We looked in the clouds and God wasn't there. We looked in space and God was not there. Now the only place left is outside of the universe, and that's where these people have moved their God. We didn't decree a goddamn fucking thing. You did. Can God break, bend, or manipulate the laws of nature? I foresee that this kind of bullshit could be easily destroyed with something similar to the problem of evil. Is something a law because God declared it to be so, or did God declare it to be so because it was a law? Some atheists claim that God cannot exist for the very reason that the laws of nature cannot be broken, bent, manipulated. Right. If you say that there are laws of nature, things that always happen and have never been observed to be anything other than the way they are, your God, who is said to violate those things, cannot exist. Right. However, since bullshit arguments are easy to make, I will simply say that God can break those things because he's magic, and magic trumps sense. However, since God created the laws of nature, God holds the patent on them, has the template of them. God put them into place and can manipulate them like a guitarist who strings the guitar, can place them in any order, can tighten or loosen them as he pleases, and can thereby make the strings produce whatever pitch he pleases. The laws of nature cannot be broken, bent, or manipulated, and have never been observed to do so, and only a very poor understanding of them can allow you to say that ropes and helicopters float even though their weight is greater than their buoyancy, but there's another force at work. No. You're just wrong, and your ignorance does not stand as proof of your fucking stupid point. One-time atheist C.S. Lewis, who was an atheist as much as I was ever a woman, which, in case you can't tell, I was not, C.S. Lewis offered a classic response to David Hume's arguments against miracles. Now, of course, we must agree with Hume that if there is absolutely uniform experience against miracles, which there is, if in other words they have never happened, which they haven't, why then they never have? Unfortunately, we know the experience against them to be uniform only if we know that all the reports of them are false, which, as far as we have tested, they were. And we can know all the reports to be false only if we know already that miracles have never occurred. Bullshit. You can test them after the fact and find out that all of them were fucking fake. In fact, we are arguing in a circle. Well, yes, C.S. Lewis, you are arguing in a circle. The problem is you think other people are spinning around when in fact you're the one who's fucking dizzy. On the side here, there's a picture of a depressed guy leaning against a very dingy cement wall with a caption underneath, "Atheists have higher rates of suicide. See later, 11.2, Atheism and Suicide." Right. Atheists commit more suicide, therefore God. Oh wait, that has no fucking relationship. Maybe it is true that people who aren't alcoholics are more depressed. Does that mean being an alcoholic is good? I ask you. Does doing pot lead to a lower rate of suicide? Does that therefore mean that pot is God? No. It is possible that because atheists are people who do not hold to religious dogma, such as Christians do, they do not have as strong an objection against the idea of killing themselves. Like married women who are married to oppressive men but are firmly religious, they may be in opposition to the idea of divorce and therefore stay with this abusive spouse of theirs for far longer than anyone else would do, far longer than anyone sensible would do, simply because a magic book tells them to. It is also possible that atheists, who are universally reviled by all members of religions around the world, atheists being seen as villains are more oppressed and more teased and more attacked by other people, and therefore would naturally have a higher rate of suicide in order to escape this oppressive and evil world ruled by religious fuckwits who hate them because they're too fucking stupid to think for themselves. That's just a picture on the sidebar. I'll cover that maybe later on in 11.2, but okay, atheists commit suicide more. How much more? Doesn't matter. It's not mentioned, so maybe it's 0.1% more. Who the fuck cares? The fact that atheists, if it is a fact, have higher rates of suicide, and I have no reason to doubt this one, does not make Jesus real. The basic atheist opinion on miracles, continuing here with the chapter I was currently on, is certainly that they do not occur. No. The basic atheist opinion on miracles is, the fuck are you talking about? What the fuck miracle is this supposed to be about? But beyond dismissing all miracle claims out of hand, atheists are likely to, without evidence, claim that what are thought to be miracles are, in reality, merely the outworking of natural laws in rare and unexpected ways. Right. Sure, okay. Beyond dismissing all miracle claims out of hand, which all atheists do, except the ones who don't, because, again, making a bad point only works if you can then justify it with a bad argument. It makes more sense to believe that a magic man who lives in the clouds, but outside of our universe, is doing magic, than to think that perhaps something else is going on that we don't fully understand necessarily at this point, but makes complete sense with regards to the natural laws that we have never observed to be broken in any other context than the unexplained thing we're seeing right now. No, far more likely, a magic man done it. Therefore, they place their faith in expecting that in future, science will find material explanations for unexplained miracles. The science of the gaps. Oh, that projection is so fucking... Remind me again who I just described as continuously moving their God away from what science knows. Considering this view, one can only wonder how or why any atheist would deny any miracle claim. Easy. They don't fucking happen because every single one that has ever been claimed to have happened has had something else behind it that we've seen. The ones that have been tested anyways. Other claims have never been justified or tested at all, so I don't know what the fuck was going on, so I'm not gonna just bow down and say, oh, therefore Magic Man. Why would they not state something to the likes of, Jesus did in fact resurrect from the dead, but it was due to a genetic mutation, a coincidental intermingling of natural laws, etc. Because it's fucking stupid, is why. That is fucking stupid. Why would I assume that Jesus did come back from the dead when there's no fucking proof Jesus even fucking existed? For more, see Miracles in Science, another article elsewhere on creation.com. You're welcome to go see it for yourself. 8.2 Origins. As to the issue of how life began on Earth, various theories have been proposed and various experiments have been carried out. Correct. John Horgan, Scientific American's senior writer from 1986 to 1997. It's nice to know that we're keeping up with the latest science all the way in 1997. I mean, this article was written in 2009, I'll have you remember. A solid 12 years after this Scientific American senior writer, but no longer held that job, wrote an article that surveyed a multitude of abiogenesis theories, which have all failed. He begins the article by stating, scientists are having a hard time agreeing on when, where, and most important, how life first emerged on the Earth. Sure. The current thinking is actually that the cradle of life is somewhere in what is today known as Africa. Oh, wait, are scientists having a hard time agreeing on that? Fuck. I guess 1997 wasn't really up to date with the most recent scientific findings. Let us take a quick look at some of the comments of John Horgan and others. quote, some investigators concluded that the first organisms consisted of RNA. Although this scenario is already ensconced in textbooks, it has been seriously challenged of late. Molecule cannot easily generate copies of itself. The quote mining alarm is sounding very strongly on this one. The first organisms made of RNA probably were made of RNA, yes. The first organisms were probably simple, self-replicating compounds, but at the point at which you couldn't call something an organism, perhaps they are consisted of RNA. It's not necessarily the first life just poofed RNA, there you go. Therefore, all that organisms are based from that. No, it's possible that RNA developed and we call those things organisms. You know, it doesn't necessarily have to be the other way around. It could be one is derived from the other. Not just magic and therefore organisms. Molecule cannot easily generate copies of itself. Right. Molecule, whoever that is, probably can't clone himself by magic. Again, I'm being petty here, I know, but really quote the right parts of sentences. I know you have a serious problem with quotes here, Mariano, author of this article, but you really fucking suck at it. Quoting someone else without closing the quotes, many investigators now consider nucleic acids to be much more plausible candidates for the first self-replicating molecules. There's a hitch. DNA cannot do its work, including forming more DNA, without the help of catalytic proteins or enzymes. In short, proteins cannot form without DNA, but neither can DNA form without proteins. Though, to those pondering the origin of life, this is a classic chicken and egg problem, which can first proteins or DNA. The answer to that is proteins. Just like the classic chicken and egg problem, the egg came first. Choking on my saliva again. That's twice tonight. I'm sorry. Yes, the classic chicken and egg problem is a problem only for ignorant fuckwits like Mariano, author of this article, and his cronies at creation.com. It's not a problem. DNA is not the same thing as the first nucleic acid. DNA came after RNA, which is also a nucleic acid. So I don't even need to know much about DNA here and the currently dominant theory of abiogenesis to tell you that this sentence was either quote mined the fuck to hell, or the author of this article is a dumbass. So I don't know which is which, because hey, that's a problem with quote mining. Yeah, the RNA, the DNA stands for deoxyribonucleic acid. Nucleic acid, yes, DNA is a form of nucleic acid. RNA, ribonucleic acid, as in nucleic acid. That's what the Na stands for. If DNA cannot form without the help of catalytic proteins, can RNA? Can other nucleic acids that are not named, that may have predated ribonucleic acids? And proteins can form without DNA. They haven't directly been observed to do this, but in the Miller-Urey experiments, they set up this little experiment where they had the conditions they thought the early Earth had when life formed, and they put a bunch of stuff in a jar and they ran electrical currents through it, and they formed amino acids, which is one of the building blocks of proteins. So if you can build one of the building blocks of something else, can you really assert as fact, well, you have the bricks, but houses can't be built with bricks? Continuing again, RNA might be the first self-replicating molecule. Might be, probably wasn't. But as researchers continue to examine the RNA world concept closely, more problems emerge. Once RNA is synthesized, it can make new copies of itself only with a great deal of help from the scientist, says Joyce of the Scripps Clinic, an RNA specialist. It is an inept molecule. Right. So you have this RNA specialist who I assume is making synthetic RNA from the, quote saying, once RNA is synthesized, it can make copies of itself only with help. Right, so scientists are making RNA molecules that are not very good at self-replicating, therefore no RNA has ever been good at self-replicating. Julius Riebeck, Jr., created a synthetic organic molecule that could replicate itself. Riebeck's experiments have two drawbacks, according to Joyce, Gerald F. Joyce of the Research Institute of Scripps Clinic. I guess it's the same Joyce they just quoted. They only replicate in highly artificial, unnatural conditions, and even more important, they reproduce too accurately. Oh, so because molecules are inept at reproducing and reproduce too well, therefore life was poofed into existence by magic. Magic Man, solving all your intellectual difficulties with bullshit. Without mutation, the molecules cannot evolve in the Darwinian sense. Yes, artificial molecules that are made too well can apparently not evolve in the Darwinian sense. Whoop the fucking do. Throw Darwin out the window. Orgel agrees. Good for Orgel. What Riebeck has done is very clever, but I don't see its relevance to the origin of life. Neither do I, honestly. Making up synthetic molecules is interesting, but unless he's actually trying to prove the origin of life with these molecules that reproduce too accurately and can only replicate in highly artificial environments that he has created in unnatural conditions, I remind you, I don't see the relevance to the origin of life either. The simplest bacteria, another quote, is so damn complicated from the point of view of a chemist that it is almost impossible to imagine how it happened, says Harold P. Klein of Santa Clara University, chairman of a National Academy of Sciences committee. Right. It is almost impossible to imagine how it happened. Proof is, these Christian dumbfucks are completely unable to imagine how it happened, and therefore shit on everybody else's head and think they're smarter than them. Even if scientists do create something with lifelike properties in the laboratory, they must still wonder, is that how it happened in the first place? Yes. We can come up with a self-replicating molecule similar to RNA that self-replicates in non-laboratory, unnatural conditions, but we still have to wonder, is that how our life actually happened? Because if you have one molecule wrong, then no, it wasn't. But if you have one molecule wrong and you have a form of self-replicating life that is not the same as ours, now you have life forming twice. So the Miller-Urey experiments was actually great in that they didn't not have the original conditions of Earth at the time where life is believed to have developed. They had the conditions wrong. And the test still succeeded in creating amino acids. That was the point. Not to create, a frog in this jar with electrical spikes and everything. No. The point was to see if amino acids could spontaneously assemble themselves, and they fucking did. Not only did they, but they did so in conditions that did not match the Earth. So life can occur in conditions that are two different conditions. Early Earth and slightly different than early Earth. And it wasn't the only time that experiment was run, by the way. Christians love to say that it was a complete failure. It did not prove that life began from nothing. Yeah, it wasn't supposed to. And they didn't have the right conditions. So they successfully had the right condition, the wrong conditions, and yet had success. But other people have done the experiment many times since with different conditions, including one that is now believed to be the actual conditions of the Earth, and they have all succeeded. So, yeah. We must still wonder, however, is it still how it happened in the first place? The point is, it's possible. So if it's possible for life to spontaneously assemble itself out of existing molecules with catalysts directing the chemical reactions, if that is possible, why the fuck do we need some magic man coming in and sprinkling pixie dust on everything? It was Urey's work that inspired Miller. Yet over the past decade or so, doubts have grown about Urey and Miller's assumptions regarding the atmosphere. Oh, great, just what I was saying. Ultraviolet radiation from the sun, which today is blocked by atmospheric ozone, would have destroyed hydrogen-based molecules in the atmosphere. Free hydrogen would have escaped into space. Really? Free hydrogen would have... we have free hydrogen now. Does it automatically escape into space? Does I know helium does. We're going to run out of helium very, very soon. Not tomorrow, but in a few decades perhaps, maybe a few centuries. Would hydrogen do the same thing? Hydrogen is lighter than helium, so perhaps. I don't know. Hydrogen-based molecules would be destroyed by ultraviolet radiation. Really? Okay. So Miller succeeded with conditions that were wrong, and even though they succeeded, since the conditions were wrong, they were wrong, and that's the end of it. Okay, so Miller's experiment worked, but it worked wrong, so the real conditions also make it impossible. Bullshit. Miller notes that modern deep ocean vents seem to be short-lived. Superheated water inside the vents would destroy rather than create complex organic compounds. Except we do have these forms of life called extremophiles that do survive around vents in the deep oceans. There's no light at all anywhere, and yet you have these forms of life that can exist only in those places. Their universe is perhaps this big. Smaller than my head, perhaps in some cases, perhaps a little bit larger, and I do have a large head right now. These forms of life have a universe that can support them that is the size of my fucking face, and yet... oh, it would destroy the complex organic compound. But it doesn't, is the point. If the surface of the Earth is a frying pan, Miller says, a hydrothermal vent is the fire. And yet, extremophiles. So this is probably quote mined to fuck. Gunter Wachterschauser, I apologize for that pronunciation. His theory calls for a very specific solid surface, one made of pyrite or fool's gold. Where's my pyrite? Oh, there it is. Yes, fool's gold, like this one here. Fool's gold, a metallic mineral consisting of 1 iron and 2 sulfur molecules. Great. The first cell, he conjectures, might have been a grain of pyrite enclosed in a membrane of organic compounds. Okay? Oh, therefore, abiogenesis is wrong. Right. Pyrite is an impossible molecule, so his theory is just completely out there. Fool's gold, by the way. Iron and sulfur. A.G. Cairn Smith proposes that life arose on a solid substrate that occurs in vents and almost everywhere else, but he prefers crystalline clays to pyrite. Unlike some origin of life theorists, Cairn Smith cheerfully admits the failings of his pet hypothesis. No one has been able to coax clay into something resembling evolution in a laboratory, nor has anyone found anything resembling a clay-based organism in nature. Yet he argues that no theory requiring organic compounds to organize and replicate without assistance is likely to fare any better. Organic molecules are too wiggly to work, he says. Well, good for him. It's great that he's trying something, he's failing, and he's, happy to fail, because that's what science is. You try things, and sometimes you get it wrong, and sometimes other people get it right. But the fact that he's doing this experiment proves that you can dismiss his pet clay hypothesis. At least someone has excluded that hypothesis from better ones, perhaps. He might find that the current organic compound theories are likely not to fare any better, but who the fuck cares? How the fuck does he know that they will never? That's not what he's saying. They're likely to not fare any better. So what? If neither the atmosphere nor vents provide a locale for the synthesis of complex organic compounds, maybe they were imported from somewhere else, outer space. Yes, panspermia. The vents do provide a likely locale for the synthesis of complex organic compounds. Extremophiles, again. Or maybe life on Earth was imported imported from somewhere else. Maybe it wasn't necessarily life that came in riding on a meteor. Maybe what happened is the meteor, or a meteor that landed, had certain chemicals in it, certain atoms that were lacking in the original mixture, and that is what was the catalyst for life to occur on Earth. Oh no, this means it's aliens. See how silly those atheists are? They think aliens made life. Right, Magic Man did it, makes sense. Aliens, way out there. Christopher F. Chiba and others suggested that any extraterrestrial object large enough to supply significant amounts of organic material to the Earth would generate so much heat during its impact that most of the material would be incinerated. It's too much like manna from heaven, says Sherwood Chang of NASA, Ames, an authority on extraterrestrial organic compounds. Well, yes, most of the organic material would be incinerated. Most. Do you know what the word most means? Here's a hint. It is not the same thing as all. And yes, it is a bit too much like manna from heaven. I would tend to find this to be extremely unlikely because it's kind of like saying Magic Man did it. But it could possibly be true, because you don't have to assume the existence of a magic man for this to happen. You just have to recognize that meteors exist, and therefore it's a possibility. Remote possibility, but it's a hell of a lot more likely than Magic Man. Continuing again, a lot of quotes and no point again. Svante Arrhenius, who assented that microbes floating throughout the universe served as the seeds of life on Earth. Yes, that's the sentence. Svante Arrhenius, who asserted that microbes floating throughout the universe served as the seeds of life on Earth. In modern times, Hoyle and Sri Lankan astronomer N. Chandra Wickramasinghe continue to promulgate this notion. Good for them. Hoyle. Is that the same Hoyle that believes the universe is a steady state? About a decade ago, Orgel and Crick, speculating that the seeds of life were sent to the Earth in a spaceship by intelligent beings living on another planet, ... intent to point out the inadequacy of all explanations of terrestrial genesis. The quote mining comes fast and hard here. Can you feel it? The sentences don't even follow. They don't make sense. There's bits missing. It's even worse than just the typos we've seen before. This is just outright picking and choosing what the fuck you want to make your fucking point. As Crick once wrote, the origins of life appear to be almost a miracle. So many are the conditions which would have to have been which would have had to be satisfied to get it going. Yes, it does appear to be almost a miracle. That doesn't mean therefore God. Sorry. Stuart A. Kaufman proposes that simulations demonstrate that a system supplied with a sufficient number of such generic polymers will undergo a phase transition that causes it to become autocatalytic. Kaufman says he is absolutely convinced. Asked if he has any test tube results to back up his computer simulations, Kaufman replies, "No one has done this in post, but I'm sure I'm right." Well, good for Kaufman. He has a simulation, it seems to work, and he thinks he's right. That doesn't mean, therefore, he is right, even though he has no proof, and therefore it's just like believing in God. He's convinced he's right. Good for him. Autocatalytic? I'm no chemist. I'm really no expert in chemistry, and I'm going to get rid of this thing before I cut myself. I'm no chemist, but an autocatalytic reaction strikes me as a block of iron with a scratch on it, developing rust along the scratch. And as the rust forms, the rust being nothing more than oxygen, oxygen atoms combining with the iron atoms in the block of iron. As the rust grows, the iron oxide grows along that damaged surface area that allows more oxygen to enter in contact. The rust would spread. Now, rust is not a biological, it's not an organism, it's not a biological molecule. There's no carbon in it, for one thing. But it happens once because of some outside catalyst, and then it continues its own reaction. So, oh no, autocatalytic reactions seem to be completely impossible. Note that 1 year after the publication of this article, Scientific American, February 1992, pages 16-17, published The Mephistopheles of Neurobiology, which features Francis Crick in the profile section, which stated, Crick insists that given the weaknesses of all theories of terrestrial genesis, directed panspermia should still be considered a serious possibility. Therefore, scientists believe aliens. Stanley Miller of the Miller-Urey experiment fame, or infamy, see why the Miller-Urey research argues against abiogenesis, an article obviously on creation.com, seems to have a succinct and colorful manner by which to categorize each proposed theory. He refers to the deep ocean vent hypothesis as garbage. As for the first cell developing on fool's gold, he states, I'd love to see the experimental evidence. Actually, so would I. He calls the pyrite theory paper chemistry, whatever the fuck that is. This article certainly isn't going to explain anything. It's just going to assume that the idiot sheeple who go to church and believe everything is told to them will just sit here and believe everything that's told to them. As to the autocatalytic theory, he states, running equations through a computer does not constitute an experiment. Right. That doesn't mean that the simulation is wrong and that an experiment that would be run would automatically fail. As to the whole endeavor of abiogenesis research, he thinks that the field needs a dramatic finding to constrain the rampant speculation. I think we just haven't learned the right tricks yet. Right. How is this wrong? How is this evil? How is this proof that scientists have nothing? Look at the first airplanes. You had a bunch of different models. People were trying every fucking thing. There was even an attempt at a helicopter that was basically a spiraling thing, and it was flapping up and down, and it just broke itself to pieces. People were trying to develop flight, and there was rampant speculation. But eventually there was a dramatic finding, and that came in the famous names of the Wright brothers. They made a dramatic finding. And since then, their design has influenced all future designs. Rampant speculation followed by a dramatic finding to constrain the rampant speculation, leading to the right tricks that we have learned. In the Atheism and Scientific Storytelling section below, we will see that Richard Dawkins explains the origin of life by appealing to luck. Oh, it's luck, therefore it's impossible. No one ever wins the lottery. Some points of ponder, points which will ultimately refute any successful abiogenesis experiment, were actually expressed within the article. Did you notice them? My emphases. Right. They will ultimately prove successful abiogenesis experiments wrong in the future. I know the future, says Mariano, author of this article. He knows what the future is, and he was clever enough to catch it. Once RNA is synthesized, it can make new copies of itself only with a great deal of help from the scientist. Keyword, synthesized, emphasis, only with a great deal of help from the scientist. Julius Rebeck Jr. created a synthetic organic molecule. Oh, he created, therefore all life was created. See? Gerald F. Joyce stated that these created molecules only replicate in highly artificial and natural conditions. Scary, scary! Even if scientists do create something with lifelike properties in the laboratory, they must still wonder, is that how it happened in the first place? Oh, that'll prove abiogenesis wrong. Unless it is how it happened in the first place, you fucking dumbass. Indeed, just like any and all experiments that have ever taken place, successful abiogenesis experiments would only prove purposeful creation. No. The Urey-Miller experiment, for instance, they were testing to see if amino acids would spontaneously happen in conditions that had no purpose, i.e. the early Earth, where a bunch of stuff was going on. They didn't say, we will create this thing so that amino acids are produced. They had the conditions, they ran the test to see what would happen, expecting to some extent, that amino acids would form, but that was not the purpose of the experiment. The experiment was to have the conditions and see if it would happen. This is not the same as I'm going to push a button and it's going to poke cupcakes out of the end. Muffin button. Experiments are conceived of in the minds of highly trained and intelligent scientists who entertain the thought, conceive of the experiment, carry out experiments utilizing equipment produced by highly trained and intelligent engineers for a preconceived purpose. They manipulate conditions, etc. Right, we do not have in a laboratory an entire fucking universe, and we do not have the billions of years necessary to observe the effects of things happening by themselves. Therefore, we do create conditions that speed up the process a little bit. Fucking idiot. Thus, the end result of any and every experiment is the product of the handiwork of pre-existing beings who created their results. Therefore, God, right? That's the point you're getting at. Science is God-proving. I'm slumping right now. I'm sure my face is sagging on the sides. The amount of ignorance being shown here bothers me. If it doesn't bother you, go fuck yourself. I mean that sincerely, by the way. It's not anger, it's not frustration, it's just if you can face all of this ignorance and not be annoyed by it, not be bothered, not be angered, not lose hope in humanity as a whole based on this one example of a fucking piece of shit lying through his teeth to justify his paycheck. If you are not bothered by this, you are not the kind of person I ever want to meet, because you are just uninterested in your fucking existence. However, if an experiment could be conceived where the conditions realistically reproduce possible conditions on Earth during the origin of life, and this experiment produced a self-replicating entity, life, then this would be impressive. No one has done such experiment, and nor is anyone likely to. I love that you know what the future will be, douchebag. Yes, people have done this experiment, or at least parts of it, like the Uri Miller one, and all the other experiments similar to the Uri Miller one. They have done those experiments, they are still doing their experiments, and they are coming with possible conditions on Earth, and etc. It would be impressive, and it is impressive to people like me who know that it's actually fucking happening. But to you who sit there jerking yourself off into your own fucking face all the time, yeah, maybe you're not impressed by this. You have no basis for comparison on what counts as impressive. Computer simulations also suffer from programmers preordaining the outcomes. The computer is programmed, infused with information, and as with Richard Dawkins' biomorphs and his "methinks it is like a weasel" exercise, the programmer acts in the capacity of divine intervention by guiding the process, and finally the end results are said to be akin to life and self-occurring when they were, in reality, created by an intelligent programmer. No. Maybe Dawkins' biomorphs suffers from this problem, but there are other conditions. For instance, Thunderfoot has this in one of his Why Do People Laugh at Creations videos. There's this program that runs, and there's bugs that appear, and they have different shaped faces, and the background changes color, and what you see over time is that these insects, these faces, change into a specific one, because there are conditions that are pre-programmed, such as if your face is green and you live in red land, then predators will be really fucking good at finding you because you have a green spot in a red place and you stick out like a fucking sore thumb. You program that in. Yes, it's a preconceived program. It's a preconceived set of conditions. Great. Preconcepted whatever. Does hunting not work that way? I mean, the sick and the elderly, the infirm, are the animals in packs that are usually caught by predators, or the ones that are most likely to be caught by predators. Is that pre-programmed? Oh wait, you believe in God. Of course you think it is. So there's no winning, because you engineer the conditions where everything is exactly like God. Oh, they're programming it. God programmed it. And nothing will ever change your fucking mind, no matter how bullshit we can point it out to be. A program that truly simulated abiogenesis needs to operate without intelligent oversight from the programmer to direct it towards a desired outcome. You know, there's a lot of evolutionary design programs, engineering programs, that you have a shape that you program right now, and then you make a computer run a bunch of simulations and change something and run more simulations, and you eventually get a product that's better than you could have designed yourself, because the computer ran 100 different models, 1,000 different models, a million different models before coming to something that was really good. You direct it towards a desired outcome, but the desired outcome is not necessarily what the programmer wants, it's what works best. So you see how it doesn't necessarily require intelligent oversight? Yes, someone intelligent programmed the computer. Well done, Timmy. You've missed the fucking point. Take your gold star and try not to eat the fucking paint. Sometimes this influence is subtle, but it is still there. Oh, see? Sometimes there's almost no influence from programmers, but it's still there. See another creation.com bullshit. Genetic algorithms, do they show that evolution works? Yes, they do. But you're an ignorant liar, so of course you think they don't. Evolutionists, when candid about abiogenesis, admit that the prospects for demonstrating that it could have happened are not good, to say the least. Sure, the prospects for demonstrating that abiogenesis could have happened are not good. They're actually pretty great. You know, Yuri Miller is one such example, but it's the sense that it's not good or great, it's that it's really terrible. Right, sure, maybe some of them say that. The same way that scientists say fossils are really fucking rare. We have millions upon millions of fossils, and yet they are still rare, because you have maybe, one fossil to every 100,000 things that die? So, yeah, they're rare. The prospects of demonstrating abiogenesis are not good. We still are making a lot of fucking headway in doing that, and when I say we, of course, I am referring to my intellectual superiors, i.e. scientists. Professor Paul Davies, while at the Australian Centre for Astrobiology, remarked, "Nobody knows how a mixture of lifeless chemicals spontaneously organize themselves into the first living cell." Right, no one knows that, because spontaneously is precisely the wrong word to use. Another evolutionist, Robert Matthews, stated in 2009, "What's truly amazing is that creationists aren't giving scientists a harder time over all this." I guess you could be trying to give scientists a harder time. That would require a lot more effort than any of you are capable of doing. You know, it would require some research to find out how hard it is for you to be able to point out how science is failing so much. But of course, you don't put any effort, you don't understand how research works. It doesn't say in the Bible how hard scientists are failing at demonstrating abiogenesis, so you don't know what the fuck is going on. That's why you're not giving them a hard time. They could cause some real aggro by pointing out that science can't explain how life exists in the first place. Come on, guys, get stuck in. I love this guy. I seriously love this guy. They could cause some real aggro. I mean, they do, and they often do, bitch about how science doesn't explain how life exists in the first place. Evolution comes up about this all the time. But yeah, creationists could give scientists a hell of a lot more trouble. They don't, but as I said, it would require some intelligence that they are sorely lacking. Of course, creationists who are scientists, despite Matthews' well poisoning, where the fuck did Matthews, in the quote, say that no creationists are scientists? Where? There's at least two that I'm aware of, and there's maybe a few, maybe dozen more if I'm being really generous in the world, who are creationists. In terms of cosmology, you have very few. In terms of evolution, you have very few. You have a lot of engineers who are creationists. because they deal with intelligent design every single day, so the stupid idea of intelligent design applied to life makes sense to them. But creationists who are scientists who deal with life and biology and evolution and all that stuff are very fucking rare. There's only one of them, and he's the dumbass. I think his name is Jonathan Wells. He's the guy who says that evolution is proven wrong every time you open up a jar of peanut butter. Because, hey, there's no new life in the jar of peanut butter, but, hey, peanuts were alive, so it should have formed new life. Forgetting, of course, that peanut butter is sterilized to not spoil when it's in those packages. You know that little foil cover at the top? That's the hermetic seal that prevents it from being contaminated. And life requires a hell of a lot more than peanut butter and sterile fucking conditions in an unchanging environment where there's no light, no heating, no cooling, no nothing. So yeah, there's one scientist who's a creationist, who's a biologist, and it's him. Maybe there's another one that I'm forgetting his name. I vaguely remember this young douchebag on a debate show with an atheist who was owning the fuck out of his stupid face, and people always say that dumbass won, but a handful of creationists are scientists. There's no well poisoning that took place here. What's the point? Have been doing so for decades. What have they been doing so? Oh, right. Explaining that scientists are having a lot of trouble. Right. They have. And they're douchebags for it. Instead of actually contributing to the search, they just sit there and say, yep, you guys are failing pretty hard. For much more on the impossibility of the naturalistic origin of life, see Origin of Life Questions and Answers. Another fucking link to another fucking bullshit article on this fucking stupid website. Of course, we could also show that evolution, neo-Darwinism, viz. Mutations and natural selection, does not explain the diversity of life on Earth. You could show that. Could you also show that water is dry? Because if you're trying to do one fucking impossible thing, why not do another? But it is a sufficient challenge for the atheist that life could not even get started without a super intelligent creator. Actually, as Kenneth Miller, the guy who attested against intelligent design in the Dover trial, kind of demonstrated, you can have a... He believes that you have a creator who created evolution, who created life and allowed it to evolve. So no, it is not a sufficient challenge. It's not even a fucking challenge. It's just you jerking yourself off and being convinced that you made a fucking point. So that's the end of Chapter 8. It ends not on a bang, but a very pathetic whimper. That is just pathetically wrong. But have we really expected anything else at this point? So yeah, see you very shortly in Chapter 9. And I really hope it's shorter. Although I just barely got underneath the midway point on my scroll bar. I don't know if I'm going to make it, guys. I don't know.